So you're not going to commit to follow this order? You won't commit to follow this court order?
By the way, he
Madam Secretary, I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
By gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately.
So
and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0, 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately? Why is your opinion?
It sets the stakes immediately and frames the conflict as constitutional, not personal.
I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go back to Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, Madam Secretary. But my first question for you is a pretty simple one. It's basic civics. Which branch of government does the Constitution give the authority to interpret what the law is, the judiciary or the executive branch?
Sir, going forward, the interpretation of the law, you make the laws in this body. The judicial branch makes sure that they have integrity and they're applied properly to individuals.
So so I'm just going to take that as the judiciary branch. Now, let's focus for a second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case. We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that notwithstanding your statements under oath here today, that Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was afforded due process, he was in fact not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him, and in fact require him, to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He said, the government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Abrego Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows that. This is a Fourth Circuit judge. He knows all of what the evidence is, and he's saying if that evidence... So you're not going to commit to follow this order? You won't commit to follow this court order?
By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary, I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
By gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
so
and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0? 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately. Why is your opinion better and have more authority than the Supreme Court?
Investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
no.
investigators and law
that is
enforcement
you making that determination.
Built against him. If you don't trust
the court has considered all that. The judge has considered all that, Madam Secretary. And if you would be quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, You are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back,
have
your
you
advocacy-
taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
advocating for a
Absolutely.
court order, Madam
Gone to the
Secretary.
mat for this
The
man
court
who
order
has terrorized
says
people
that
in
you
traffic,
must take
human
steps
beings.
to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for
sure it
due
is to
process,
constituents as
and
well.
that's under the Constitution,
Gentleman's
and you
time
should
has
fight too for
expired.
due process.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize
This exchange between Representative Dan Goldman and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem was one of the most contentious moments of the hearing, and it centered on a familiar fault line in Washington: due process versus executive enforcement. Goldman framed his questioning around what he called a basic civics lesson, pressing Noem on which branch of government has the authority to interpret the law. He then pivoted to the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, arguing that the Supreme Court and lower courts had ruled unanimously that Garcia was not afforded due process before being deported to El Salvador. Goldman repeatedly emphasized that regardless of the allegations against Garcia, including claims of MS-13 affiliation, the Constitution requires the government to follow court orders and provide judicial process. To Goldman's point, even judges who acknowledged the possibility of gang affiliation stressed that allegations alone do not replace legal findings. His argument was simple: the executive branch does not get to decide guilt on its own, and if the government believes its case is strong, it should prove it in court rather than bypass judicial procedures. Secretary Noem pushed back hard. She argued that law enforcement and immigration courts had already determined Garcia's status and that DHS acted appropriately based on those findings. She repeatedly stated that Garcia is in his home country and would be immediately removed again if returned, framing the court's directive as impractical and unnecessary given prior determinations. As the exchange escalated, the tone deteriorated quickly. Goldman repeatedly reclaimed his time, accused Noem of filibustering, and at one point bluntly told her to be quiet. Noem responded by accusing Goldman of advocating for a terrorist rather than for his constituents, a charge Goldman rejected by insisting he was defending due process, not the individual. At that point, the hearing crossed from substantive disagreement into raw confrontation. The central issue, whether DHS had taken active steps to comply with a court order requiring facilitation of due process, was never clearly resolved on the record. Goldman demanded specific actions DHS had taken to comply with the ruling. Noem maintained that DHS had acted lawfully and appropriately, but the back and forth left little room for clarity. This exchange highlights a broader problem in modern congressional hearings. When lawmakers and witnesses talk past each other, interrupt repeatedly, and personalize the dispute, the public is left with sound bites instead of answers. The legal distinction between allegations, judicial findings, and executive authority is complex, but it gets lost when hearings turn adversarial. The case of Abrego Garcia may involve serious allegations, but the Constitution does not make exceptions based on convenience or emotion. Courts exist precisely to test claims, weigh evidence, and ensure the government follows the law. When those processes are disputed, Congress has a responsibility to demand clarity, but also to allow answers to be heard. What viewers ultimately saw was not just a disagreement over one deportation case, but a snapshot of a larger struggle between branches of government and a hearing where tension overtook transparency. If you want clear, no-nonsense breakdowns of congressional hearings without the shouting and spin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Redscope for more unfiltered political commentary.